And there we go. All right. I'll take a quick round of questions, and I'm going to do a little quick 15 to 20 minute like bathroom and move around and stretch break, and then we'll reconvene. But any quick questions that are on topic? Yeah.
Yeah, on the startle set, do you still open that way?
The tap on the shoulder? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't happen every time. That happens like one time in like 15, one time in 20, etc. And when it does, it usually isn't even a big deal.
Oh, okay. And another question about that set is, if you have a target, I suppose you just kind of go in neutral and then make them both feel good and then pick the target so the other one doesn't feel totally left out, or?
Something along those lines. It varies. But typically I want to go in, I wouldn't say neutral, but I want to go in kind of being positive to everybody and just acknowledging and engaging everybody and then pick my target. Although, sometimes if the situation's right, or if you made eye contact with her on the way over or something like that, then I'd go straight on, like just acknowledging her as the target from the start. But typically it's acknowledge the whole group and then shift to the target as quick as you are able to do without offending others.
Oh, okay. Because
Yeah.
I've actually gone into, like, say, a 5-set, for example, and it's,
That's a little different because a 5-set, there's enough girls that the one can kind of get lost in the crowd and you don't have to engage her. You don't have to be like, hello, 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 hello. You don't have to do that in a 5-set. But in a 2-set, like the other girl's really bored if you leave her alone. So it's very important to engage everyone. It's still important in a bigger group, but much less so.
Okay.
Yeah.
In both sets, there's close to no physicality or physical escalation, right? So I understand that the point of physicality is really to like convey the intent, but also some part of it to make you comfortable with your touch.
Yep.
So there wasn't too much touch. Like I feel that the girls are not that comfortable with your touch. So once we do start escalating, it's not to convey the intent, but to build that comfort with touch, right? Is that correct?
It's both. It's always going to be both. But yeah, it's understand that in the daytime, the vibe is not necessarily as physical. Like in a club, dancing and grinding with a girl, like having basically your like thigh in her pussy basically is like not a big deal, right? In the daytime, that is a big deal, right? So it's just the amount of touch necessary to convey the same thing is less. So just like a touching on the shoulder, a little light hug in the daytime is enough to convey man to woman a lot of times, whereas at nighttime you may need to make out or may need to do other things like that.
Yeah. I understand the intent and conveying the intent, and that can be done verbally, but I'm more asking about just making her comfortable with your physical presence.
I'm good with that. I'm not super concerned with that because I'm very confident in my abilities there. I'm very confident that once we get alone in a place where touch is more natural, i.e. like if we're sitting at a bar together or we get back to my place or something like that, I'm very confident in my ability to get physical, so I'm not really worried about it.
Right. So then once you get along with her, you like rapidly physically escalate with her pretty much, right?
I don't know about rapidly, but incessantly, like continuously. So I wouldn't be making big moves, but I would be making moves and I would continue to make them until I receive negative feedback.
I'm asking because this is much different than how Jeff is dating from what I saw. He does a lot of physicality, still slow paced, but a lot, much more.
Yeah, I'll occasionally get physical in the daytime sets, but I feel like the risk to reward isn't really there. And essentially a model that I kind of have now is that there's 4 different ways to escalate. There's logistical, meaning moving around, physical, meaning getting physical, and then there's verbal content and then verbal intimacy. And I found that you can gain just as much, distance in the set, or just as much progress in the set by doing one of the other forms of escalation than physical with less risk. Like given a choice between touching the girl and moving her to go get coffee with me, I'd much rather move her. And I think like the risk level for getting coffee versus a fairly intimate form of touch is pretty similar, right? So of the two, in day game, I prefer logistical escalation, whereas in like night game, I would lean towards having more physical escalation. But it's just a choice. I think physical escalation is fine too. And I also think a bit of it's a stylistic thing too. Like you certainly could get more physical than I do, and I think it'd be totally fine. I don't particularly get aroused by getting physical with a girl outside of like sexual physical. Like just like hugging a girl or whatever, I don't get hard from that. It doesn't really do much for me. So like certain things like massaging a girl, kissing a girl, getting very intimate, and like we're like breathing on each other's necks and stuff, that gets me aroused. But there's a big gap between where I'm starting and there. And so all that stuff in between, it just doesn't do much for me. I'm not that interested in it. So instead of doing that, I'm more interested in trying to make the set effectively get to a place where I can do that. So that's why I focus on the logistics personally. But if you're either A, uncomfortable with touch, I'd suggest doing more, or if you enjoy touching girls a lot. If you just enjoy that light touch and it's like something that's good for you, I'd say you should do more of it than I do for sure. Yeah, we'll take 3 more questions, yeah.
So you're saying do what arouses you?
To an extent, as long as it's not over the top.
Yeah.
Do what arouses you that doesn't put her off. Yeah. And you want to do the type of thing that arouses you to the extent that you can without putting her off. And then once she's put off, back off a little bit and then restart again later.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
I noticed that. Wow. Try Vegas one day. I noticed that like you're really comfortable with using like game terminology a lot, just like in general. And
You mean when I explain the set or like in the set?
when not obviously not like when you're talking to the
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah. So, and recently I've just been like fighting with myself, like, do I use the game talk or not? Like, what's your view on all the?
I think it's contextual. Like in this room and on this video, I would say like people probably know a decent amount of the game talk, so I could probably use it a little bit. If I was talking to some guy off the street that's never heard of any of this stuff and I didn't want to like turn him off and make him think it's weird, then I would probably, instead of saying a set, I'd say like, a girl that I'm talking to, right? Or instead of saying like escalate, I would be saying like, sometimes I'll touch the girl because it shows certain things, right?
Will you say game taught speech like out in the field, like with your buddies?
Again, just depends on the audience. The nice thing about game talk is that it is efficient because the concept is clearly defined. So in one word, you can define an entire range of information. So it's efficient, right? But for people that aren't immersed in that it's silly to use that. And also to a certain extent, people can overuse it to the point where they start to distance themselves from normal reality and make it cultish. And if that's the case, you might want to back off as well. But yeah, in general, just speak to your audience. And that's the same speaking to you guys, speaking to a camera, speaking to girls. Just know your audience. You want to speak in a way that your audience will relate to. Yeah. Yeah, both of you, but you first.
So in the second set, I started talking about the attention, interest, decision, and action of hooking the set, right? The second set, where would you say was kind of the decision part?
Which one's the second set, by the way?
The second one was the girl with the boyfriend.
Girl with the boyfriend? So there's a range of decisions. One decision is when she chooses to speak to me, when she decides to ask me questions instead of just like responding with one-word answers. That's a big one. Another decision is when I say, oh, well, I just have to do it another time, and she says, okay, when she complies. So there's a range of little decisions throughout. Does that make sense? Yeah, I mean, there's not like one decision where it's like, okay, fuck me now, right? It's I like him enough to put energy into the conversation. I like him enough that when he suggests we get together, I don't correct him. I like him enough that I give him a number. That's a decision, right? That was like the big decision in the set was giving me the number. But so yeah, there's always little decisions, and each of those requires a certain amount of relevance to her and her feeling the right kind of emotions. And when that's in place, she's willing to make that decision. Yeah.
So it was said that you were for the venue change in like 20 seconds or something like that?
The one with the Asian girl?
Yeah. So
Huh?
do you always go as fast, or what makes you go like that fast for the venue change?
As soon as they like me, I'm starting to try and figure out how it can go somewhere.
Know if they like this might or like.
Usually it's if they start asking me questions, if they are clearly reacting, like when I say something that's not funny,
In your frame.
and they're in my frame, that's one, if they're following my conversational thread, or if I say things that aren't funny and they're giggling even at the non-funny things, all those are good indications that they really like you. If they are blushing and flustered, that's a good one. Any of that kind of stuff. If they're compliant, if you say, hey, come here, and they come to you, then that's an indication you might be able to bring them somewhere else.
Normally when you open like one like that one, 30 seconds and 2 minutes, or sometimes you stay in the same place for like 5 minutes?
5 or 10 minutes is a lot for me for one place. I typically want to move it before that, so I'll be trying to at the very least, but it also depends what the place is. The two girls in the park, there's less reason to move them. Because if you're sitting down with them, laying down with them on the grass, that's exactly, it's already an instant date. Or like you meet a girl in a coffee shop, you sit down with her, there's not a lot of reason to move her. But if you meet a girl in a situation that's not conducive to conversation that friends have, meet her on a street corner, meet her in the middle of a street, those kind of things, right? Then you want to move her quickly. So it depends on the context. But yeah, in a context where it feels and looks like a pickup, I want to move her as fast as possible. Yeah.
When you do move for like a smoothie, for example, what is your policy on like paying for the smoothie? I know some people like never pay, some people are like, I don't give a fuck. What do you do?
My policy is I'm fine to pay. I just don't want it to be awkward. And the reason for that is, number one, I make enough money that I don't have to worry about $6 one way or another, right? So that's a big part of it. I mean, when I was a broke college kid, it was a little different, but even then I didn't mind so much. The big thing I want to avoid is making a big deal of it one way or another. I don't want it to be this big awkward thing about who pays or doesn't pay, because then it looks like there's a lot of reactive stuff going on.
Okay,
I'll just cramp my leg. But yeah, if it looks like it's a big deal, that's not good. That's what you want to avoid. If she wants to pay, I'm totally fine with it. In fact, I prefer it. Right? If she wants to pay, totally fine. And don't be the guy that like resists and is like, no, I must pay for you or whatever. But I think that the key to that is how you frame it. Right? If you frame it as like, I'm paying for you because otherwise you wouldn't talk to me. Or if you lead with that, if you walk up and be like, hey, can I buy you something? That's not so good. But when it's just like a part of the normal interaction, it was your invitation, right? So it's almost like if you invite someone to a party, they expect that like you got your own birthday cake, or there's a birthday cake waiting for them, or whatever, or there's some kind of like alcohol at the party or whatever. You provided for your own party. Does that make sense? So if you invite somebody to something and then like invite them to the party and be like, oh, by the way, I need you to cater the event too. It's a little bit like, what? That's weird. So that's the frame I take on it. But the biggest thing is that it not be a big deal.
Thanks.
Cool. One last one.
When you're leading physically, if they give any kind of objection, do you actually just step back and go back in comfort for a little while?
Typically, not necessarily comfort, but go back to normal conversation and something that's emotionally good for them. Sometimes that's comfort, sometimes that's teasing them, whatever. But yeah, if I get specific resistance to a particular thing, I'll almost always back off, at least temporarily. But that doesn't mean permanently. Just because I back off on physicality now doesn't mean 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, I don't start again, right? And typically if you start again in a different way. So if you tried to hold the girl's hand and she resisted that, then I would just avoid holding her hand. I might later on just try and hug her instead. Does that make sense? You never want to directly get someone to admit they were wrong, right? It's very hard to do. Instead, just avoid that step. Like other than the penis in vagina step of physicality, no step is essential for sex, including kissing even, right? So if you're getting specific resistance on a particular move, back off, get the vibe right, and then try again. But don't necessarily try again for that specific move either.
Well, I guess I was looking more from a perspective when you're walking with her and you're leading and she starts objecting, where are we going, what are we doing? You just kind of go back into comfort with her.
That varies. Sometimes what you want to do there is like change the subject and just like not let it be a big topic because it's just a minor objection that'll go away. It's just a token objection. But if it's a legitimate objection, you may have to deal with it, in which case you may have to give her some information. You may have to reassure her. These things can happen sometimes. You just have to assess like how much the objection is just her being temporarily nervous and how much it's a legitimate, real objection. And maybe even how much she's just like messing around with you or testing you. So it's, as with many things in game, the answer is it depends.